This is breaking news.
And we interrupt this program for breaking news. I'm Mary Calvi, and Luigi Mangione has pled guilty in his federal case. Here are the charges he pled guilty to: 1 count of interstate stalking resulting in death and 1 count of stalking through the use of interstate facilities resulting in death. Both carry a maximum potential sentence of life in prison. Mangione still facing murder charges in a state case. He is accused of shooting and killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson near the Hilton Hotel in Midtown. It led to a multi-state manhunt. Police eventually arrested Mangione at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Right now, our Alice Gaynor is inside the courtroom delivering the details to us. Let's begin with Allie Bauman. She is live outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Allie, what do we know? As we wait for Allie Bauman to give us the latest details, we do understand and can confirm that Brian Thompson's family was in the courtroom as Luigi Mangione pled guilty to those charges. Let's get over to our legal expert for more analysis. Rich Sorensen joins us now. And Rich, were you surprised by this outcome?
I'm not surprised by the outcome because I think plea negotiations are always going to happen in a case like this. And it's always possible that the defendant is going to take a plea, especially where the evidence seems insurmountable. And it did seem like there was substantial evidence against him. So I'm not surprised. Also, the timing is right. There's a trial set to start next month. So if he was going to plead guilty, this was the time to do it.
Why would a defendant like Luigi Mangione plead guilty in the federal case?
So the first reason is he feels the evidence against him is too strong to get a not guilty verdict. He doesn't think he'll prevail at the trial, at either trial. So he wants to take a guilty verdict. Pleading guilty is a possible inroad to a lighter sentence by the judge. Judges tend to be more relaxed about a defendant who has pled guilty than someone who makes you go forward with the trial. Also, there's been a lot of speculation that he might prefer to stay in a federal prison rather than a state prison. So he wants to make sure he is found guilty of the federal charges. And finally, I think he's hoping, his legal team is hoping, that this will derail the state prosecution entirely so that trial either won't go forward or will go forward in a way that gives them some more strategic options.
What comes next for this state case? What steps will be taken here?
I presume that the defense team is going to make a motion to dismiss at least the murder counts on double jeopardy. They're going to assert that because he's accepted a conviction under the federal charges, the state charges are substantially the same. That's going to be a matter of debate. That's going to be hotly contested because I don't think the prosecution is going to agree that they're the same charges. The federal charges are stalking-based, although they involve resulting in death, while the state charge is an intentional murder charge. So there is going to be an argument that those are different, but that argument is going to have to be decided by the state court.
This was a last-minute conference that was called, and we're hearing the result of it now. When will we hear about the sentencing for this case?
I presume that the court will set a sentencing hearing. Sentencing is done by the judge. The parties don't agree to a sentence in advance the way they do in some state courts. They're going to have a sentencing proceeding. There'll probably be pre-sentencing reports done for the judge. There'll be an opportunity for statements at a sentencing hearing by the defendant, by the victim's family, by others, and they'll have an actual hearing. I don't know when that's going to be set. I heard that the lawyers were looking at calendars at the beginning of today's proceeding. I bet that's what they're thinking about.
We have a team of reporters inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom right now. Let's get to Allie Bauman. She is outside with the latest details for us in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, Mary, Luigi Mangione now pleading guilty to the federal stalking charges, which carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. Our Alice Gaynor is inside the courtroom right now and says that Brian Thompson's family is in the courtroom as well, as Luigi has changed his plea. He entered the courtroom this morning about 15 minutes after the scheduled 11 a.m. appearance in a beige prison jumpsuit. and signed a paper, then his attorney told the judge, quote, Mr. Mangione is prepared to plead guilty to the indictment at this time. Now, it was nearly 2 years ago that United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was assassinated in Midtown Manhattan in December of 2024. And a short time later, after a multi-state manhunt, Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. Now, prior to today, Mangione had pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him, both in federal and in state courts. Mangione is not charged with murder in the federal case here. Earlier this year, a federal judge actually dismissed the murder charges against him federally, and along with them, the potential for the death penalty. Now, the plea deal also comes weeks before his state trial is set to begin, and in the state case, for which he is charged with second-degree murder, this plea deal now raises the question of double jeopardy, which in New York prohibits a person from being prosecuted twice for the same offense. Legal experts say that it is up for debate if the state charges against him will be dismissed now, and it is expected if that were to happen, if that were to be filed, that state prosecutors would likely file that motion if it was filed by, would likely fight that motion. It was filed by the defense team. Now, we have reported in the past on the massive following that Luigi has amassed over the past year and a half or so, with many of his supporters showing up to court time and time again for multiple of his appearances. We've seen people out here as well, some of his supporters out here as well. And as of this morning, an online fundraiser has raised over $1.5 million for his legal fees. Now, Mangione was set to go on trial in the federal case in January. We're still waiting word on what may happen with sentencing now that he's changed his plea. Mary?
Ali Bauman live outside court in Lower Manhattan. Again, a guilty plea from Luigi Mangione today in the federal case. We are speaking with our legal expert, Richard Schoenstein, in regard to this. And the timing being now, weeks before that state case, there wasn't much time before this could happen. I mean, it had to happen now.
Well, that's absolutely right. If they want to get it done, they had to put in a plea now, and they're going to have to do that briefing I talked about. They're going to have to make a motion in the state court to try to get rid of that trial in advance. They did not have much time to work with. Jury selection is supposed to start on September 8th.
And that's a good question, too. Jury selection about to begin. Do you believe that in any way this state murder case will continue? Will we see jury selection happening?
I mean, there's a good possibility it could go forward. Like I said, this question of double jeopardy is not settled law. There is a statute in New York that's relevant. There is some precedent, but we don't have an actual case on all fours that tells us how this is going to go. It has to be considered by the court. Also, there are other charges in the state case. There are firearms charges. There's a charge of false instruments. Those charges are not being resolved at all by this federal plea. And in theory, the state could go forward on those charges, even if the murder charges were dismissed. I don't know if they will do that. Now, there's a possibility that the state judge will push back the trial to allow some time to sort all of this out, because it is a complex legal issue. Both sides need an opportunity to brief it. It needs to be decided by the court. We could see those state dates get pushed back, even though previously the judge hasn't been very excited about moving the dates.
Now, he is at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn right now. Where might we see Luigi Mangione moved, and when would that happen?
That will only happen after sentencing. He would get a sentence. It would be for a prison term of some length. It could be up to life. The judge is explaining to him at this hearing this morning the potential penalty, which includes life in prison without parole. So it would be a permanent federal facility, not the MDC in Brooklyn, which tends to be more of a temporary thing. I'm not sure exactly what prison he would end up going to, other than it would be in the federal system, which most defendants prefer over the state system.
Is there any likelihood we may see a lower sentencing, 25 years to life, something in regard to that, probation at some point, parole?
There's no real parole in the federal system. So the first question is, what is the sentence he's going to give? Will the judge give 25 years or 25 to life? And will there be a possibility, I guess, a possibility of parole? And that's an open question. It's going to depend, I think, on what happens at that sentencing hearing. It may depend on what Luigi Mangione has to say for himself. Is he going to apologize, or is he going to maintain that this was a justifiable act that he had to do because of the healthcare system? I mean, if I was the judge, I'd be very interested in hearing from him right now and trying to assess if there is a possibility that he could be returned to society someday and be a productive member of society.
Might we hear him speak before sentencing?
Yes. I mean, he has an opportunity. He will have an opportunity to speak at the sentencing hearing. He will be asked if he wants to make his statement. He is speaking now today, but I think mostly to answer yes or no questions from the judge. But he will have an opportunity to say what he wants to say before he gets sentenced.
And what about victim impact statements? We do know that Brian Thompson's family is in the courtroom today. When might we hear from them? When might the judge hear their words?
The victim's family will have an opportunity at the sentencing hearing as well. Sometimes they put in victim impact statements. They put in written things. But, you know, this was a father with a wife and young children, and they can put in those facts for the judge either through written submissions or through live testimony.
And we would hear that at sentencing?
You would hear that at the sentencing hearing.
How long might it take for us before sentencing happens? Are we talking weeks or are we talking months?
I think you're talking somewhere between a month and a couple of months. Mm-hmm. I think there has to be a little bit of time, especially if they need to do a pre-sentencing report and allow for submissions from the various impacted parties. But it's not going to be, it'll be this year.
Let's go over again the details of what we learned this morning as Luigi Mangione entered court in a tan prison suit and went before the judge. This has been in discussion, intense negotiations leading to this between the defense and the prosecution. We learned today a guilty plea. Again, talk about the charges he pled guilty to. Okay, so there are two charges here, and they're both technically stalking charges. There's a federal statute stalking in interstate travel and a federal statute stalking using interstate facilities. This is because he crossed state lines to come into New York, stalk Brian Thompson, and then kill him. So these are federal anti-stalking statutes, but the particular sections of these statutes involve resulting in death. This is when the stalking leads to the death of a victim, which it did Brian Thompson. Those are the counts he is pleading guilty to. Each one carries a potential penalty of life in prison without the chance of parole. If that is off the table and we see a lower sentence, would you be surprised? I mean, life in prison is what's been talked about. We even heard the death penalty early on in this case. Why would a defendant like Luigi Mangione plead guilty in a federal case if it still involves life in prison? So the death penalty is off the table because his lawyers did a great job and got those charges dismissed. That's off the table. A defendant hopes that the judge will be more lenient with a guilty plea than the judge would be with a not guilty plea where they have to go through with a trial, especially in a case like this where the trial would be a month or longer, take up the time of a jury, take up the time of the court, take up the resources of the federal government. Judges are more lenient if there is a plea, and Mangione's hope has to be that he's a young person. He has no prior criminal record whatsoever. He's obviously smart, well-educated. He'll have a lot of support at this sentencing hearing for what kind of human being he was prior to these events. And the hope is to persuade the federal judge that this is somebody who could spend time incarcerated and come out and come back to society. And it's whether or not the judge will be persuaded that that possibility should be credited, even though there is a dead victim in this case. There were intense negotiations leading to this morning. You wonder if the prosecution side may have been concerned in any way about juror nullification here. Well, again, I'm not sure that there had to be negotiations. He has pled guilty. He didn't need the prosecution's permission to do that.
He comes into court. He changes his plea on these 2 counts from not guilty to guilty. He doesn't have to negotiate. Now, he probably did. There probably were discussions between his defense team and the prosecutors about when this would happen and what the procedure would be going forward. But this is a self-affecting action by the defendant to come into court and plead guilty.
We are hearing words from Luigi Mangione. We want to go now to court, and Ali Bauman has the very latest for us on that. Ali.
That's right, Mary. Right now, we are hearing for the first time a narrative from Mangione himself. We have Alice Gaynor inside the courtroom at this moment as Luigi is addressing the judge and the court. We're following along with her notes as she types them out, so I'm going to read directly from them right now. Now, after he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty, he spoke to the court and addressed the court saying, quote, "After years of enduring severe pain from a broken back and navigating health insurance system, I learned United Healthcare was holding its annual investor conference in New York City in December 4th, 2024. And although the location was not publicly disclosed, I then researched the event online. I observed annual conference of America's largest healthcare organization with the state mission to make health system work better for everyone. And it would be attended by the company executives and the board of directors, not doctors or nurses." He goes on to say, "I traveled outside of New York to Manhattan. I emailed leadership posing as an investor requesting information about the conference. And unlike previous interactions with insurers, I received a response within an hour." He goes on to say, "I used a 3D printer to make parts of a gun, put a gun silencer and magazine on, traveled to New York City with, quote, the intent to shoot Brian Thompson. On the morning I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan," Luigi says. "When I did so, I understood my actions would place him in fear of death or serious bodily injury." At that point, in Alice's notes, she says that a few of Brian Thompson's family who was inside, or members of Brian Thompson's family who's inside the courtroom right now, put their heads down and a couple of them began to cry. The judge then asked Mangione, is there any reason is there any reason why I should not allow him to plead guilty? They say no. The prosecution then says that video showed the defendant arrived, showed that he arrived and followed Thompson around a hotel room in Midtown. Video showed the defendant shoot Mr. Thompson as he walked down the street. And again, I'm reading these notes as they're coming in directly right now from Alice Gaynor, who's inside the courtroom as this is all unfolding, hearing these words going out of Luigi Mangione's mouth for the first time since he was arrested for the death of Brian Thompson nearly 2 years ago. Now, earlier, when he changed his plea, something that I think was important to note is that the judge specifically asked his defense attorney, there is no plea agreement between you and the prosecution, to which his defense attorney said no. So this is not a plea deal. This is simply Luigi Mangione changing his plea from not guilty to guilty in these federal stalking charges. Now, later on, the government said in a letter, the prosecutors now said in a letter that the government thinks sentencing should be 292 to 365 months of imprisonment. That comes out to about 30 years of imprisonment, and that is less than the life in prison that is the maximum sentence possible for the charges that are against him. Now, the judge also wanted to make clear to Mangione, he asked him several questions throughout this hearing so far today. He said, do you understand that there is no parole in the federal system, the judge said, and that there is possibility to earn good behavior and other programs, but he has to serve at least 85% of the sentence. So it is possible that in this federal case with these federal charges, he may not end up serving life in prison. Of course, that could come with the state case that's coming. So, Mary, that's what we're having right now. We'll continue to follow along. Back to you.
Detailed admission of guilt from Luigi Mangione. Ali Bauman live outside the courthouse for us. And that concludes our coverage. We will have more coming up on CBS News New York at noon.
This has been breaking news.
And we're continuing our coverage on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. We have legal expert Richard Schoenstein with us. going over this admission of guilt from Luigi Mangione. Very clear, very detailed about what transpired.
Yeah, so I was saying before he would have an opportunity to speak eventually, but apparently he's doing that right now this morning. The judge is allocuting him, taking his confession, his admission of guilt, his plea of guilty, and Mangione apparently laid out in some detail both why he committed these crimes and how he committed them.
And what do we know now in regard to the sentencing?
So the government, again, there's no plea agreement. The government and the defendant can't agree on a sentence. But the government has apparently put in a statement that they think he should be sentenced to 292 to 365 months. That would be a maximum of about 30 years. And remember, in the federal system, you have to serve 85%. I'm doing rough math on a piece of paper. But I think it means that the government is saying a 30-year sentence with a possibility of release in 20 years, which I think is a really good deal for the defendant in this case. And you were asking me before why he would take this deal. That's why he would take this deal. If he's got a possibility of getting out in 20 years for this crime, that is why he's taking the deal.
I mean, when we heard initially the death penalty was on the table possibly, and now we're hearing it could be 20 years to life. Actually, not even to life. It's just 20 years in prison. And so that is a very big difference and a good reason for him to go ahead and plead guilty today. That's
right. I mean, he's 20-something right now. I forget his exact age, but he could potentially be out of jail in his 40s. That may seem like pretty long when you're 20, but when you're my age, that seems like a pretty good deal.
Now let's talk about the state case. What comes next? What will we hear the lawyers do in this case?
So I think we're going to have to get a decision from the state prosecutors. There will be some pressure that they ought to cut a plea with him, too. He's pleading guilty in the federal system. Why do we need to continue the prosecution in the state? Can't we get a plea in the state, too? Can't we wrap up all the proceedings so that we don't have to use any more government resources? We don't have to take up the time of a jury. There will be pressure on the state. The state and the federal prosecutors haven't gotten along so well on this case, and maybe in general these days. So I don't know if the state will go for that. If they want to continue the prosecution, they're going to have to get past this double jeopardy argument. And that argument is, I'm sure there would be a motion by the defense that the state murder charge has to be thrown out on the basis of these guilty pleas and conviction in federal court, arguing it's the same crime. And that's going to be an intense legal battle.
And now we are hearing the date of the sentencing, December 18th. So we will wait and see what happens there. Richard Schoenstein, thank you very much for taking time out to speak with us throughout this case. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll continue our coverage on CBS News New York at noon. We'll have the very latest inside and outside the courtroom with live team coverage.
This has been breaking news.